In the final, desperate hours, when the world outside fades to a terrifying whisper, what are the last thoughts that race through a doomed queen's mind? What does Anne Boleyn whisper to herself as the shadow of the scaffold looms? Her name, once a symbol of power and passion, now a byword for treason. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, faces her execution, but beyond the judgment of men lies the untold story of a woman's heartbreak. Abandoned, accused, her every hope extinguished. What strength did she find in those final, agonizing days? What memories of a love turned to bitter ash haunted her waking nightmares? Today we journey into the heart and mind of Anne Boleyn. Experience her final hours, her deepest emotions, the whispers of a soul confronting its tragic destiny. This is the story of her heartbreak, before execution. The cold stones of the royal chambers. A gray dawn, murky as stagnant water, barely seeped through the narrow window, barred by a thick grate. In the royal apartments of the Tower, the very same ones that, a mere 3 years ago, had been renovated with feverish extravagance at her, Anne Boleyn's, command before her coronation, there now reeked pervasively of dampness and dust. The oppressive atmosphere of the entire fortress, which for centuries had served as the final refuge for many noble prisoners, seemed to have seeped in here too, into these once glittering chambers. The carved furniture, once gleaming with gold and crimson velvet, now reflected dully in the semi-darkness, a reminder of past grandeur, now turned to dust. Only a distant creak and the measured, almost ghostly footsteps of the guard beyond the oak door occasionally broke the oppressive silence. Anne sat on the edge of the enormous four-poster bed, huddling in a heavy shawl. The chill did not come from the stone walls. It had settled within her, an icy band constricting her heart. For nights now, her sleep had been a ragged, anxious oblivion, from which she would surface with a pounding heart, not immediately recognizing the familiar outlines of the room where she had once prepared to become Queen of England. Irony, sharp as a freshly honed blade. A light knock. Lady Margaret Kingston, the constable's wife, entered with a small tray. Oatmeal, bread, ale, breakfast for one who only yesterday had commanded destinies. A fleeting bitter smirk touched Anne's lips. Lady Kingston, a short woman with quiet movements and eyes full of concealed sympathy, placed the tray down. Anne barely touched the food. Her gaze, dark and wide from sleepless nights, was fixed on Lady Margaret. "Lady Kingston," her voice was weak, yet still held imperious, slightly mocking undertones. "Is there truly no word from His Majesty? Has he truly forgotten everything?" Lady Margaret lowered her eyes, fidgeting with the edge of her apron. She always avoided the Queen's direct gaze, afraid of betraying her dangerous pity. "The King is occupied with affairs of state, Your Majesty. You should conserve your strength." "Conserve my strength?" the thought flashed. "For what? For the block?" Aloud she merely nodded. The humiliation burned more intensely than the cold. She, Anne, for whom he had defied Rome, was now here, awaiting word from the man who had sworn eternal love. And the fear, cloying, suffocating, not so much for herself, but for her, for little Elizabeth. What would become of her? What new mother would enter her life? Would she ever learn the truth about what happened to her own? Her heart clenched at these thoughts, at the powerlessness to protect her child. Pride prevented her from showing the full depth of her despair. But in her voice, in her frozen stare, there was such disbelief, such a universal sense of wrong, that Lady Kingston shivered. She knew the Queen was not guilty. But what was her knowledge against the King's will? Lady Margaret, taking the almost untouched tray, lingered at the door. "Pray, Your Majesty, only prayer can bring comfort, or a miracle." The door closed. A miracle. Here, within these walls, the word sounded like a mockery, but a stubborn spark within her made her ponder. What if? What if Henry came to his senses and remembered that dazzling summer day, shortly after their secret betrothal, when the Thames seemed to laugh beneath the bright sun? Their royal barge, draped in crimson velvet and gold, glided slowly down the river, and all of London, it seemed, had poured onto the streets to greet her. Anne, their future, already almost acknowledged queen. A light breeze fluttered the banners, the sounds of music and laughter drifted by, and the air was intoxicatingly light. She stood on the deck beside Henry, his hand holding hers firmly. His gaze, usually so piercing and imperious, was now full of an almost boyish adoration that made her heart flutter sweetly. He took a necklace from a velvet case, a massive gold chain with a falcon pendant, her emblem glittering with diamonds. "Look, Anne!" His voice, usually booming, now sounded soft, almost intimate, as he fastened the necklace around her neck. The cold gold touched her skin. "All of London is at our feet, and soon all of England will bless the name of its new queen. You are my future, my hope." She laughed, throwing back her head, and the sun played in her dark hair. In that moment, she was on top of the world. "I shall be worthy of your love and trust, sire," she replied, her voice filled not only with reciprocal tenderness but also with confidence. "And our son will strengthen your dynasty." Then, she had not considered that difficulties might arise with the birth of an heir, nor how quickly this all-consuming passion, this vow of eternal fidelity, could turn to cold fury and betrayal. He bent and kissed her hand, a long, ardent kiss. And at that moment, as his lips touched her fingers, it seemed to her that for one brief, elusive instant, something else flickered in his eyes, not just tenderness, but a predatory, possessive spark. She had dismissed the feeling then. Why mar such a triumph with fleeting fears? And now, in the cold, damp silence of the tower, that sunbeam on the royal river, that laughter, that illusion of eternal happiness, burned her memory more fiercely than any fire. If you enjoy this story and want to hear more about forgotten destinies and royal intrigues, subscribe. There are many more fascinating stories ahead. The specter of accusation. The wind outside howled like a hunted beast. The single candle on the table flickered, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the cold stone walls. Several days stretched into an eternity, filled with this howling and the thumping of her own heart, which either faltered with ill forebodings or began to pound furiously at every footstep of the guard outside her door. She would fall into a feverish despair, demanding to see her father and her dear brother George immediately, then suddenly freeze in a prayerful ecstasy, insisting that the Holy Sacrament be constantly present in her chambers. The heavy bolt on the door slid back with a protracted screech, and the figure of Sir William Kingston appeared in the doorway. His face, usually inscrutable, today seemed carved from gray stone, his eyes avoiding her gaze. He stopped at a respectful distance. "Your Majesty," he began in an official, emotionless voice, "His Majesty is concerned by certain rumors regarding your fidelity and the conduct of your associates." These words fell into the silence of the room like stones. Anne slowly raised her head. In her widened eyes, bewilderment flickered first, then an icy terror, replaced by a sudden consuming fury. "Rumors!" she repeated, and her voice, hitherto quiet, suddenly strengthened, resonating like a taut string. She sprang to her feet, the shawl slipping from her shoulders. "What rumors, Sir Kingston? What nonsense are you spouting? My brother, my friends—" Each word was like the lash of a whip. "It's a lie! A vile lie to slander me! I demand to see the king, immediately!" Her world, which she had so painstakingly built, which had seemed so solid, crumbled in an instant. This was not just an accusation, it was a final, irrevocable betrayal. Henry, her Henry, had not merely believed this abomination, he was behind it. This realization seared her, burning away the last vestiges of hope. Sir William did not flinch, only tightened his lips almost imperceptibly. He was a man of the system, an executor of will. But even through his stony self-possession, an inner discomfort showed. The Queen's fury, her desperation were too genuine not to leave a mark. He had seen her in various states these past days, sobbing, laughing with an unnatural mirth, praying, and had reported everything to Cromwell. He cleared his throat before answering, and his voice sounded even colder, cutting off the last path of retreat. "The king does not wish to see you, madam. The court will decide your fate." The court. The word sounded like the toll of a funeral bell. Anne froze, her face paling. The court. So, it was all decided. Kingston, without waiting for a reply, bowed curtly and left, leaving her alone in the midst of her collapsing world. The letter that never reached its destination. The next night was torture. Sleep would not come. Anne sat at the table, a single candle meagerly illuminating a sheet of paper, a quill, and an inkwell. Her hand trembled as she penned the lines addressed to him, to Henry. It was her last, desperate attempt to cry out, to break through the wall of lies and mistrust that had been erected between them, her last attempt to influence her fate. Never prince had wife more loyal in all duty and in all true affection than you have ever found in Anne Boleyn. Her lips whispered, repeating the words that flowed onto the paper. Each letter was steeped in her suffering, her turmoil, the shards of her trampled affection. "Let not any light fancy or bad counsel of mine enemies withdraw your princely favor from me. Remember that I have always been your most loyal servant." She wrote feverishly, afraid she wouldn't finish, that the words would lose their power if she delayed. This was not just a cry from the soul. It was her final stake in a game where her life, her honor, and her daughter's future were at stake. She poured everything she had left into this letter. Her pride, her pain, her desperate, almost insane hope that he would remember, reconsider, understand. When the first pre-dawn twilight tinged the sky beyond the bars with a leaden hue, the letter, dated the 6th of May, was finished. She carefully folded it, sealed it with her personal signet ring, the very one he had once given her as a token of their unbreakable union, and waited, almost breathless. In the morning, when Lady Kingston brought breakfast, Anne, barely glancing at the food, held out the sealed envelope. "Lady Margaret," her voice was quiet but insistent, "I implore you, deliver this to His Majesty. Personally, it is very important." Lady Kingston took the letter. In her eyes, usually full of sympathy, a flicker of doubt mixed with anxiety appeared for a moment. She promised, but somewhat uncertainly, averting her gaze. "I will do everything in my power, Your Majesty." But as she was at the door, she turned and added, almost in a whisper, as if fearing even the stone walls could overhear, "Thomas Cromwell now controls all His Majesty's correspondence, madam." Anne understood. Cromwell, her former ally, now the chief architect of her downfall, her letter, her last hope, would most likely not even reach the king. It would settle among Cromwell's papers, unread by the one to whom it was addressed, becoming just another document in the case of high treason. Hope, already as faint as a candle flame in the wind, was almost extinguished. The child's slipper. The days dragged on in a gray, suffocating procession. The thought of Jane Seymour, of her already noticeable pregnancy, hammered relentlessly in Anne's mind, and each blow of this invisible hammer resonated with an icy fear for Elizabeth's future. One evening, as she sat staring blankly, Lady Kingston, entering with supper, inconspicuously placed a tiny object on the edge of the table. Anne didn't notice it at first, but then her gaze caught the familiar gleam of pearl-embroidered Morocco leather. It was one of her Elizabeth's first slippers. Her fingers with trembling touches caressed the soft leather, and a wave of searing memories overwhelmed her. A sun-drenched room, a little girl with fiery red hair like her father's, toddling awkwardly across the carpet, laughing with infectious, childish glee. She would stretch out her chubby hands to her, and Anne would scoop her up, twirl her around, kiss her silky hair, inhaling the sweet scent of infancy. These were moments of pure, unblemished happiness, when nothing, it seemed, could mar her world. The abrupt return to the cold, damp reality of the tower was almost physically painful. Anne pressed the tiny slipper to her heart, and the tears she had held back for so long gushed from her eyes. They streamed down her cheeks, burning her skin, mingling with dust and despair. Her love for her daughter, her greatest vulnerability, her Achilles' heel. But now, in the face of imminent doom, this love, this fear for her helplessness before a new favorite and a potential heir, transformed into the sole source of her will. The thought of Elizabeth, of her being left alone in this cruel world, gave her a desperate desire to endure, not to break, even when all seemed lost. This same thought intensified the pain of realizing their inevitable separation, of understanding that she would never see her little girl again, never hear her laughter, never be able to protect her. She clutched the slipper in her hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "I must be strong," she whispered through her sobs, addressing either herself or the ghost of her little daughter. For her sake, so that she might one day know the truth, so that she knows her mother was not the monster they will try to portray. This new, tragic purpose gave her strength. Let her life be taken, but the memory of her, the truth about her must survive for Elizabeth. The executioner's word? The 17th of May dawned gray and bleak. The rain, which had begun during the night, had now turned into a tedious, cold drizzle, its drops tapping against the glass of the single window like persistent but indifferent fingers of fate. Anne sat at the table, listlessly staring at her untouched breakfast. A sharp official knock on the door made her start. Sir William Kingston entered. His face, always stern, was particularly grim today, almost funereal. In his hands, he held a rolled-up parchment. He stopped in the middle of the room. The silence that fell after his arrival became almost palpable. Anne waited, her heart thudding dully. Good news no longer existed for her within these walls. "Madam?" Kingston finally said, and his voice, usually steady, seemed to her to tremble slightly today. "His Majesty has appointed your execution for tomorrow morning, the 18th of May at sunrise." Those words, so simple and so final, hung in the air. The 18th of May, tomorrow, so soon. She had expected it, but to hear them aloud from this man in this cold room was like a blow to the gut. She exhaled slowly, trying to quell her trembling. Kingston cleared his throat and continued, still not looking at her. "And he has shown mercy. The executioner will arrive from Calais. It will be a sword." A sword! Not the crude axe, but the elegant blade of a French master. Royal mercy. What a mockery, what refined cruelty hidden beneath a mask of compassion. Anne remained silent for a long time, looking at her hands folded in her lap. Then she slowly raised her head, and in her dark eyes, framed by lashes still moist with unshed tears, a strange, almost frightening spark flickered. "A sword?" she repeated, and the corners of her lips twitched, forming a semblance of a smile that grew wider until it became a quiet, almost soundless laugh. A laugh that would have made anyone shudder to hear it in that grim cell. A laugh that held no mirth, only bitterness, defiance, and a strange, perverse relief. She clasped her hands around her neck as if measuring it. "What an honor! I have heard that French executioners are very skilled, and I have such a slender neck." And she laughed again, this time louder, almost merrily, though this laughter was like the tinkling of shattered glass. It echoed off the stone walls, making Sir William Kingston flinch. He had expected tears, pleas, curses, anything but this laughter. The next day, on the morning of May 18th, when Anne had already mentally prepared herself for the end, Kingston returned. His face was even more inscrutable. He informed her that the execution, by order of Mr. Cromwell, was postponed to the morning of May 19th. The official reason was the need to complete the annulment of her marriage to the king. But Anne knew. Cromwell did not want foreign ambassadors, who were due to leave London to witness her execution. This delay, this new torment, broke her for a moment. The tears she had held back for so long gushed from her eyes. But it was only a brief flash of weakness. When Kingston left her for the second time, Anne had already regained her composure. Silence closed in around her again, but now it was a different silence. The silence of waiting. Slowly, almost pensively, she ran a hand over her neck. slender, yes, very slender, and so defenseless. The Queen's last night. The night before the execution was starless and oppressive. The wind had died down, and only the monotonous tapping of raindrops on the glass broke the heavy silence of the tower. Anne sat on a hard chair by the window, gazing into the darkness where the vague outlines of the fortress walls were barely discernible. She did not pace the cell as in previous nights, nor did she succumb to hysterics. After the news of the postponement, after those bitter tears, a strange, almost unnatural calm had descended. Acceptance. Early in the morning, even before dawn, she had asked for a priest and received Holy Communion. Kneeling before an improvised altar, she firmly and clearly, looking at the crucifix, swore on the Holy Sacrament her complete innocence of the crimes of which she was accused. This oath before God seemed to release her soul from its last earthly torments. Now her thoughts flowed slowly, smoothly. She recalled not the bright, triumphant moments, but quiet, almost forgotten episodes. Little Elizabeth's smile, her father's warm, strong hands, Henry's betrayal. Yes, that too. But now, on the threshold of death, even that wound no longer bled so fiercely. Resentment was fading, giving way to a kind of universal weariness and forgiveness. Yes, perhaps. What was the point of harboring malice now? She spoke softly to herself. "Forgive me, my daughter, for not being able to protect you," she whispered, and the tears she had held back for so long now rolled slowly down her cheeks. But these were no longer tears of despair, but tears of purification. "But no, my Elizabeth, your mother was not a traitor. Remember that I loved you more than anything in the world. Be strong, be wise. Do not repeat my mistakes. Henry, may God forgive you, as I am trying to forgive now. I was a queen, and I will die as a queen." This decision, simple and final, filled her with a strange, almost solemn calm. She stopped clinging to ghostly hopes. She found strength in her royal dignity, in her maternal love, in her unwavering faith. Outside the window, it began to grow light slowly. The gray, bleak dawn of a new day, her last day. Through the monotonous drumming of the rain, the first, still indistinct sounds reached her. A distant, muffled hammering, the creak of a cart, unintelligible voices. The scaffold was being prepared. Her death was being prepared. Anne stood up. In her eyes, still moist with tears, a steady, resolute fire now burned. She was ready. The gown for the scaffold. May 19th. Dawn had barely broken, painting the narrow strip of sky beyond the bars a leaden gray. The rain had stopped, but the air was damp and cold. Anne sat on the edge of the bed, upright, almost motionless, and only a slight tremor that occasionally ran through her body betrayed her inner tension. Lady Kingston entered, this time not alone but with another of Anne's former ladies-in-waiting, one who had dared to stay with her until the end. Both women's faces were pale, their eyes tear-stained, but while they held themselves together, trying not to show their grief before the Queen. Anne rose to meet them. She herself had chosen her final gown of dark gray, almost black damask, simple, without excessive adornment, but beneath it the edge of an underskirt of crimson silk was visible, the color of blood, the color of martyrdom, or perhaps the color of her defiant heart which still beat in her breast. She dressed slowly, almost detachedly, and in every gesture, in every glance, there was a strange ritualism, as if she were preparing not for an execution, but for her last, most important performance on the world's stage. Her movements were fluid, full of that innate dignity that neither prison walls nor the proximity of death could take from her. Lady Kingston could not bear it. Tears streamed from her eyes. "Your Majesty, you are so calm," she whispered, struggling to hold back her sobs. Anne looked at her, and a faint, sad smile appeared on her lips, the smile of a person who had already said farewell to this world. "I go to meet a more merciful judge, my lady. What is the use of fuss now? And you?" She turned to both women, her voice softening. "Do not mourn me too bitterly. pray for my soul." The second lady-in-waiting, who had been silent until then, sobbed, "How can we not mourn, Your Majesty? Such injustice." Anne gently touched her hand. "Death is but a passage, my dear. I hope to find peace there, which I never found in this life. The Lord is merciful. Remember that." There was a knock on the door, short, demanding. "It is time, madam," said the rough voice of a guard from behind the door. Anne took a deep breath, as if gathering her last strength, straightened her shoulders, cast a final glance at her cell which had become her last refuge, and took the first step towards her destiny. The Queen's last speech. Tower Green was bathed in a dim, gray morning light. The low scaffold, only a few steps high, hastily constructed from rough planks, looked both sinister and mundane. A crowd had already gathered around it, courtiers, officials, guards. Their faces were impassive like masks, but a tense, almost suffocating anticipation hung in the air. To one side, by the block covered with black cloth, stood the executioner, a tall, faceless figure in a black hood. In his hands rested a long, narrow sword gleaming dully in the morning light. Anne ascended the scaffold steps slowly. She walked upright without lowering her eyes, her step firm. She wore no royal regalia, but she carried herself as if she were still Queen of England. Reaching the top, she surveyed the crowd. For a moment, a dead silence fell, broken only by the cawing of ravens on the tower walls. Then she spoke, and her voice, clear and even, carried over the square. "Good Christian people," she began, and her voice held neither fear nor plea. "I am come here to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it." She paused, as if allowing her words to sink into the consciousness of her listeners. "I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord." A barely perceptible murmur ran through the crowd. Words about a merciful prince from the lips of a woman going to the block by his will sounded strange. But Anne's face remained impassive, her voice even. "And if any person will meddle of my cause," she continued, and her voice became slightly firmer, "I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul." She finished. The speech was short, but every word in it was carefully chosen. It was a display of incredible self-possession, a strength of spirit unbroken even in the face of death. Many of the ambassadors and chroniclers present would later note her astonishing composure and the strange, almost unearthly beauty that illuminated her in these final moments. Anne knelt, closed her eyes, and whispered the last words of a prayer. Her neck, slender and white, seemed so fragile. The executioner stepped forward, raised his sword. The crowd froze. The silence after the strike. The strike was swift and precise. For a moment, a silence so profound fell that it seemed time itself had stopped. And then, her ladies-in-waiting, those few who had remained loyal to her, rushed to the body, covering it with their shawls, preventing the crowd from reveling in the spectacle. King Henry VIII did not mourn for long. The very day after the execution, he was betrothed to Jane Seymour, and 11 days later, they were married. Anne's name was forbidden, her portraits destroyed, her symbols erased from palace walls. It seemed they wanted to obliterate her not only from life, but from memory itself. Her little daughter, Princess Elizabeth, not yet 3 years old, was declared illegitimate, removed from court. The French ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, who had witnessed the execution, would later write, "She died as she had lived, inconvenient and defiant." Anne Boleyn's name was dragged through the mud, but her blood, the Boleyn blood, ascended the English throne in the person of her daughter, becoming one of the brightest stars in England's history. Such was the final, unspoken victory of the Queen, whose last exit became the beginning of her legend. If you enjoy experiencing history through storytelling, make sure to subscribe. Many more fascinating tales await. This story is inspired by real events but includes elements of artistic fiction. Up next, you will see a list of historical facts that formed its foundation.